What you're looking at, can we do just the image or is it as
Full
part of
screen.
full screen?
Oh, Google, where's the full screen extension on
View,
Google?
go to view, go to view.
That'll work. That's good enough. So, this is a fun image for me to share because I think it's actually as prevalent to anything we're talking about today as anything I've ever experienced. I had the unbelievably unique pleasure and honor of actually hiking to the base camp of Mount Everest. Pretty amazing place, 29,000 feet. There's an expression in Hebrew, it's Ma'aseh Bereshit, the things of creation. Actually being in the presence with something that awesome, literally filled with awe. In front of you was absolutely spectacular. I loved it. Years of stories to tell about it, and I'm not going to tell all of them, but I'm going to focus on this image. This is now 2 days after being at the summit, or hiking downhill. And where this image was taken, above me to the left, as you can see, there's a space that's kind of rising up to my left-hand side of the image. That space I thought was the valley floor, but that valley floor was 1,000 feet higher than where I am right now. Okay, the mountain in front of us, at the bottom of this image, the mountain that's there, that actually it's part of the base area of two mountains. They're called the Twins. One's at 21,000 feet, one's at 21,500 feet. So one is actually called the Big Sister. It is absolutely spectacular. Now remember, that's 21,000 feet. The largest mountains we have in America are 14,000 feet. Okay, so this is 50% larger than anything we have here. And that's a small, these are small compared to Everest, which is 29,000. I'm walking downhill. This is actually a grade going down. And can anybody see anything unique about this image? Not a test.
It looks like there's erosion.
Erosion. Excellent, by the way, in certain seasons that would be filled with water. I'm gonna make it life much.
Is that a yellow ribbon? What am I imagining? It looks almost like it's a ribbon like for
Yeah,
Israel.
it does, but it's not.
Okay.
By the way, it could be, but it's not because it's also many years ago.
That's crazy.
So I don't know if this is, can you zoom in on this image? I don't think you've got this. I don't think keep doing it. Anybody notice anything that's coming in? I want to see actually on the path. Do it one more time on the path. Now go up a little bit. Okay, now middle of the picture, see where that jagged shaped rock right
Yeah.
there? Can you focus to the left of that? Any bigger there? Did anybody see anything there?
Is that people?
Those are humans.
Okay.
Now zoom back out again.
Oh.
Now zoom back out if you can.
That is.
Perspective.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Perspective. We are literally nothing. 21,000 foot mountain in front of us. We are ants. The reason to me that's so important is, first of all, it's awesome being humbled in mountains. Mountain spaces make you kind of go, oh boy. And I thought I was something special. On the other hand, Judaism teaches two wonderful, wonderful thoughts. You're supposed to walk around the world with two different pieces of paper in your pocket. One says that the gnat was created before me. On those days when you're feeling so hoity-toity, like you're the best thing in the world. And on other days when you're feeling kind of gloomy and bummed out, you should have one that says, I was created in God's image. And you should walk around those. To kind of put us in proper perspective in life. This mountain did that for me, which is kind of the slap. And I didn't think about it until I saw this image. And I was able to actually zoom in on the image and you can actually see the people there in front of you. You know, what does that have to do with today's topic? I think it has everything to do with today's topic because when you're talking about nature, every so often we have to do the obvious, and that's just simply take a couple steps backwards to go, wow. With anything. And whenever you're teaching about nature, or trying to comprehend the magnitude of nature, you really need to do that, which is to at least take a couple steps backwards before you start understanding and getting deeper into it. That's how I thought I want to start this and share a great rabbi, whose name was Rabbi Hirsch, who said something really wonderful. Rabbi Hirsch had this idea that he wanted to have an expense-paid trip by his synagogue to the Alps in Switzerland. And the synagogue was saying, Rabbi, why would we ever take you to go to the Swiss Alps? And he said, because when I finally meet God at the end of my days, and God asks me, how'd you like my Alps? I would be able to answer for her. Right, if we're gonna have a relationship in our space of what relationship we have with God, God ought to be able to ask us, hey, what do you think? How'd I do with that little baby ant who can carry more on her shoulders than you could ever dream of carrying on yours? Right, that's the kind of conversation we're on behalf. So the idea that Hirsch actually would ask, or God would ask Hirsch, hey, how'd you like my mountains? Would be something that I think would be really important for us to actually have.
Everybody can probably stop sharing.
Then I thought I'd go back in time and talk about the story of creation. It's the first contact that the world has with Jews, the Jews in the world. And it's the story of Adam and Eve, not necessarily a Jewish topic, however, it's one that is found in our original book, in the Torah. And it's a pretty awesome story of Adam and Eve, right? Everybody knows it? I'm going to tell you a new tale. It's from a great book called Does God Have a Big Toe? It is a fun book to read to kids, although like many great pieces of writing for children, they are as good for adults as they are for kids.
And it's in the reading. So
Yeah, this particular chapter is called The Tomato Plant, and it says the following. In the Garden of Eden had everything. Bears and monkeys, fish and butterflies, everything. Even the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, were there. Nothing ever died in the Garden of Eden, so nothing was ever born to replace it. The Garden of Eden had everything, but everything was always just the same. One day, Adam and Eve came upon a crack in the big wall that surrounded the garden. Looking through the crack, they saw that in the brown dust outside the garden, a tomato plant was growing. At first, they could barely recognize it. In the garden, all tomato plants were tall and full and green, with many big red tomatoes on each stem. What they saw through the crack in the wall was a puny and shriveled up little thing with just one tiny green tomato barely hanging on to one of the stems. Every day, Adam and Eve would come to the crack and peep through the wall to see how the only thing growing outside the Garden of Eden was doing. One day, the little tomato plant had drooped over and turned brown. Adam looked at Eve and said, "It never looked very good, but now it looked even worse." Eve looked at Adam and said, "Whatever could have happened to me?" He sat there for a long time, peeping through the crack in the wall at the little tomato plant that had drooped over and turned brown. After a long while, God spoke to them, saying, "The tomato plant is dead." Adam and Eve cried. They asked God, "Why did it have to die? Nothing ever dies here in the garden." But God would not answer this question, no matter how many times they asked. So they became angry at God. They demanded that God let them get out of the Garden of Eden so they could take care of the tomato plant. God said to them, "You can leave, but you can't come back." Well, Adam and Eve got up and walked right out of the garden and right over to the little tomato plant that had drooped over and turned brown. Inside the garden, nothing needed help. And even though outside the garden, everything needed help, they were not sorry that they could not return. Adam picked up a tiny green tomato and he planted it in the brown dust. Many days they watered the ground, kept the weeds away, and waited. Then it happened. A green shoot poked up through the dusty ground. In a few days, it became a tomato plant, full and green with many big red tomatoes on each stem. The days that followed, when the man or the woman looked at the strong new tomato plant, they would ask the same. They would think the scraggly little plant they had one peeked at through the crack in the wall. It was a funny feeling. They were happy and sad all at the same time. I think this is an incredible story to understand the relationship between us humans on this planet and everything around us. We can simply say, "I'm done. I did it. I arrived. I'm here. I don't need to do anything else." I have no responsibility to the tomato plants, I have no responsibility to the highways and byways, I have no responsibility to anything. I'm just gonna absorb it all. I'm just gonna swallow it all up. I'm just gonna eat anything I can consume. I'm going to consume all and put nothing back. I'm gonna drive the largest car I possibly can, consume as much gasoline as I want, and not give a toot about it. That's an option. It's also an option to do just the opposite and barrel down and do everything you possibly can environmentally and ignore all the needs of anything else that's out there. Or we find that one piece of paper in one pocket, another piece of paper in another pocket, and say, what responsibilities do I have in doing that? I think the tomato plant tells a good story. What do you think? Where do we go with it? How many people here have a tomato plant, by the way? Very.
I had an experience with a tomato plant. My brother was in a nursing home. And my other brother plants trees for a living. And he planted a tomato plant out on the patio. And one day I came to visit my brother, but one of the other residents said, oh, could you go out and get a tomato plant or tomato so I can eat it? And I felt like when you were telling the story, it was these elderly people who were in this nursing home who really, some in wheelchairs, some could hardly walk. And this person was thinking about the tomato plant, like the crack in the wall.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Great story. Thank you. We had a building that had they decided to put a planter in front of the building. And the tenants decided they wanted to have, each have their own little section of it. And each one planted a bunch of different things, and every one of them planted tomato plant. The result of which were, there were way too many tomatoes for the lady. Way too many. The good news is, when they thought about it for that, they decided to set aside one area, it would be the tomato plant for everybody. And then the rest of it was divided out into their own spaces. And the beautiful part about it was, there really was an abundance of tomatoes anyway for all of them. It's just one of those things that it took the planting of the first year to kind of go, yeah, that was kind of stupid. I don't need it only for myself, I can actually share it with others. Make that tomato plant really what it should be, especially since in Wisconsin, we happen to have some pretty spectacular tomatoes. A great rabbi in the Jewish world, his name is Rambam, is his nickname. It's acronym is Rabbi Moses Maimon, or Maimonides. And the Rambam actually has a very interesting take on the responsibility we have to be to nature. And actually thinks, and he did practice it, although not all of his life, he believed in vegetarianism. He figured the best way for him to cope with a challenging world with a whole host of questions. Now, I also have to remember that the Rambam didn't live in the 21st century or the 20th century or the 19th century, he actually lived in the 14th century. And those were even more challenging times. If you think about how we get our fruits and vegetables today, they are radically different. Anybody actually living on a farm? If you do, it's kind of different, right? The agrarian world we came from, where in fact it was plentiful to simply go outside and get what you needed. Today it's a lot more complicated than that. But the Rambam figured the easiest way of coping with this is simply being a Christian. I will say something that's also challenging, and I don't know what to do with this, but I thought it'd be important to say. Differentiation between the Jewish world and the non-Jewish world, mostly in Christianity, less so in Islam, is that we don't see the story of Adam and Eve and Adam eating from the fruit of knowledge as the original sin. That original sin simply does not exist in the video. So if you talk to Jewish families who are trying to put in the confines of Jewish space, you should just know that, because it's a challenge for us, but it's a differentiation between two or three different religions. Does that make sense, everybody? Great, everyone knows what I'm talking about now? Okay. I listened to a wonderful podcast about 2 weeks ago now by a awesome rabbi whose name is Yitz Greenberg, who came up with a really neat idea. There is a thought It says in the early days of our Torah, of the Bible, God was involved in human life 24/7. We know that from the story of Garden of Eden, that God was there for Adam, was there for Eve. We know that Eve was made from Adam's rib. We know all these things about the Garden of Eden. It was all, God was just there at all times. And as the Bible goes on, the relationship with the people, with humans and God becomes less. And the less relationship that God has with humans, the more we need to fill the space to do things to make our world a better space because God's not in it as much. So the farmer that is out there today, farming the fields, isn't going, well, if I pray to God, God will provide rain. They don't do that. They have a wickedly expensive sprinkler system they put on in order to make sure that the crops are properly fed. They don't say, if I do the right number of prayers, I won't have any locusts. They actually have things that are going into their fields and either taking care of it in an herbicide way, in an insecticide way, in whatever different ways they need to in order for that not to happen. That doesn't mean the farmer's any less religious. It's just the relationship is a very different, you don't pray for things to happen. By the way, I'm not stopping any of you or suggesting to any of you, please stop praying. Quite the opposite. I'd argue we probably need prayer more today than we've ever have before. But at the same time, that physical space that we fill is very, very different. The relationship we have, where we're depending on God to do things for us, simply isn't there in the same way. That for sure was the difference between the way it was in biblical times compared to the way it was in what is known as rabbinic times. That 12th to 14th century is when Jewish life and the rabbis were thriving. And in that space, we find a bunch of rabbis, and some of you may have heard about Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai. These are the two that we seem to always be arguing with each other. They were never really arguing with each other on major issues. They were arguing with each other on how we do things, on why we do things. They didn't deny that we should be doing them. They just argued about how and why. I'm sorry, about the how, not the why. That's the second phase of Rabbi Greenberg's idea that we were once biblical, with a relationship with God very intensely, to a rabbinic time where we're actually challenging God, to a time today that he's not quite sure about how we're going to go about it. But he argues the way we do it is by intensifying how we interact with God in our lives, whether it's through prayer, or through actions. A very popular term that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is the word tikkun olam. During the world, we use it over and over and over again. That phrase is this whole idea of how we take on the responsibility to repair the world and take some of that responsibility away from God. That's my introduction to what I really want to talk about today. And then I thought it'd be great to actually do some text reading. That's what this is really all about. So this is from a great book. The rabbi's name made this in Rabbi Tolushkin. I'm sorry I'm quoting a lot of rabbis, but you don't get it quick. Every rabbi. And I thought the first one would be an interesting one to talk about. Rabbi Tolushkin wrote two great books. One is called Jewish Literacy, which has the notion that if we all read the book, we'd all speak the same language. And the second is called Jewish Wisdom. This is from the book of Jewish Wisdom. These are his chapters, or his chapter on the relationship of humans with nature around us. So we'll take the part from Ecclesiastes, Rabbah. This is from the Talmud. It's on the first page. When God created Adam, he led him around the garden of Eden and said to him, "Behold my works, see how beautiful they are, how excellent. All that I've created for your sake did I create it. See to it that you do not spoil and destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one to repair it after you." Telling us point blank here is God's words to us saying, if you don't take care of it, I'm not going to give you another chance. Was there a biblical story where there was a second chance?
Noah in the Ark.
Exactly. Noah in the ark. And the promise after that ark was after the rains stopped falling and the skies helped evaporate and the world came back into being. There was a beautiful rainbow that was created, right? And the promise was made, this will never happen again. Until you do what we've done to our planet, and now it seems to be happening again, just in smaller scales. Is that arguably An okay thing for me to say?
He's not doing anything.
God's not doing it again, we're doing it. I mean, if you really believe what the statement is saying, that God's not gonna do it again, but see to it, you do not spoil and destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one to repair it after you. I think it's a pretty amazing warning that took place in the time of the Talmud, say to us, be careful what you do to this place, because at some point, it's all you got. Right, we've got these spectacular telescopes that now take us to planets far, far, far away. To star systems that no longer exist, because if we're seeing the star, chances are good that the star is no longer there, right? It's taken so many millions of years to just get to our eyesight. We've seen all these amazing things out there, and so far, we have yet to find any other planet with any other life. Doesn't mean it may not be out there, but currently it's not there. It's only us, it's only this. There is an urgency to what we're doing. And by the way, please don't misunderstand me to become, I'm not expecting everybody to leave this room to become an environmentalist. Be a little bit. Maybe just keep your eye on it is the best way to put it. The next one I think is really great. Bal Tashchit. The biblical law that forbids unnecessary destruction. When you besiege a city, you should not destroy its fruit trees. You eat nothing, do not cut them down, for man's life depends on the trees of the field. So even when you're going to destroy your neighbors, to destroy your enemy, you're taking down everything around them. What do they tell you to do? Don't take down the apple tree. Leave that apple tree there. Leave that cherry tree. Leave that kiwi tree. Leave those fields. And it's interesting is it's actually not saying for you to eat. It's saying it pretty vaguely for it to be eaten, including those who are living there. Some of you here have traveled to the south of not South America, the southern states of America. Have you ever been to the plantations? They are some nasty places. The degree to which we barbarically treated the slave people in America is beyond my worst nightmare. And until I saw it, I couldn't fathom it. I read about it, but we planted grass surrounding the homes of the slaves. That if you walked through the grass would cave in and stay that way for minutes. So they could literally follow to see which directions the slaves ran away from. The fact that the trees that were planted in those spaces were trees with thorns in them. They rose so quickly that you literally couldn't get through them without being literally ripped apart. We've used nature so much in so many horrific ways that it's hard to imagine that first of all, that we would think that way so barbarically on one hand. And on the other hand, not go flip it and say, wow, why aren't we planting apple trees all along our highways and byways across the United States? Why should anybody ever grow hungry when you can simply literally go down Santa Monica Boulevard and pick some apples off the apple trees? Wouldn't that make sense? I mean, in a way, that's almost what's being discussed here. That you should go from a point where you're actually, when you're going to think about besieging a city, well, first of all, why do you think about besieging a city? But if you are going to do that, make sure you leave behind fruits that are there for others to be eaten. For others to eat. In wartime, look on what it says. In wartime, people were prone to ignore moral issues, let alone ecological ones. But even war does not justify needless destruction of the environment. And the next page, the principle of Bal Tashchit, literally not to destroy, is rooted in the notion that earth is Lord's and the fullness thereof. It is brought by rabbinic law to include any gratuitous act of destruction. Not only one who cuts down fruit trees, but also one who purposely and impulsively smashes household goods, tears clothes, demolishes buildings, stops up a spring, or destroyed foods, violates. You must not destroy it. Again, that's from Maimonides, right? I said before Rambam. That's from the Laws of Kings, chapter 6, verse 9. I'm going to skip a page. Yes. This is how we're supposed to treat our animals. Jews are aware the Ten Commandments include laws on legislating kind treatment of animals. The fourth commandment, which ordains the Sabbath, mandates that A, Sabbath is the seventh, the seventh day is a Sabbath unto the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your male or female, or your cattle. Anybody, again, go back to the farmers in the room. Do cows need to be milked on Saturdays? You better believe it. Because if you don't, you're gonna be miserable. Can you use your cow or ox to plow the fields on Saturday? Absolutely not. You give them that day off. There's a beauty to this that I love this stuff. I'm sorry, I'm a vegan. I'm in a whole different world than this whole thing. To me, any kind of treatment of animals is really problematic for me, but in this case, I love this notion that we treat our animals in this way as well. If the Sabbath is good enough for us, it better be good enough for them. And the idea, not only that, in fact, I think it's in the next one, we talk about the two different animals.
Yeah, the oxen and.
There it is, right below it. You should not plow with an ox and a mule harnessed either together, since both animals being an unequal size and strength will suffer. So the notion you've got this yoke right on one shoulder of the ox and the next shoulder of the mule. And think about the difference of height. Think about the difference of power. It would be ridiculous to try to have them plow the same field. That's a thoughtful way of doing it. By the way, it would also make sense because your field is going to look like ridiculousness. Imagine what that line's going to look like.
Yeah.
But all the more so, why would you do it to the poor animals? And of course, what's your frustration is not going to be on your ignorance or your stupidity. It's going to be on the ox and on the mule that didn't do it right. So if you knew that in advance, it's going to teach you a way of actually doing it, so you don't have to worry about such a thing. And again, this isn't just on the Sabbath, it's just how you would treat animals in the first place, doing it in a kind of a just way. It is prohibited to kill an animal when it's young. In such a manner, the young is slain in sight of its mother, as if the mother would know any different. The answer is maybe the mother does know a difference. And the pain of the animals under circumstances is very great. There is no difference in the case between the pain of a man and the pain of another living being. Since the love and tenderness of the mother for her young ones exists not only in man, but in most living beings. You may hear from a variety of teachers on laws of kashrut, on what the kosher laws are. Why do you eat this? Why don't you eat that? Why do you eat this? Why do you not eat that? Most Orthodox Jewish answers to that question are based on the fact that it is written so in the Torah and the Bible. There's literally chapter and verse that says, these are the foods you can eat, these are the foods you can't eat, these are the restrictions of what they are, what classifications, everything else. There are others who come along and say, well, let's rationalize it. Let's find out why we decided not to eat. Why is God telling us not to eat this? Why is God telling us not to eat that? And one of the answers is this whole notion of milk and meat. That why would we specifically have this prohibition against eating milk with meat? Does anybody want to take a shot at why that would be?
Because the infant drinks its mother's milk, and then you're eating the mother at the same time.
Correct. This idea that you would take away the very milk that feeds the young from its mother is just something that is so contradictory that we just don't do it. Now, again, that's not what the law says. The law says you don't. Doesn't ask why. We're using the answer to why. And I kind of like the answer to the why because it further kind of advances these notions. It kind of tells us this is a different way of looking at it. It's giving us a different perspective. If one encounters two animals, one crouching under the burden and the other unburdened because the owner needs someone to help with the load, he is obligated to first unload the burdened animal because the commandment is to prevent suffering to animals. We don't burden many animals anymore. We may be doing it because we don't take our dogs and cats out enough, or I don't change there. I don't change the burden. I don't know what to do with cats because I don't have cats. I'm sorry. But I won't do with dogs. And my dog would rather be outside 24/7, or at least with me outside 24/7. So I really don't know what it's like to burden something, but I've seen the loads that animals that carry these images and like, and you have to wonder sometimes, what is too much there? This is giving us the answer. If we see an animal that seems to be overloaded, unburden it. Does that seem too obvious? Why isn't it too obvious? Think of the way humans use animals.
Self-comfort purposes, so when they don't provide that for us, we become frustrated.
Let's say you've got to take a load from point A to point B, and you've got one mule to do it on. If you load it all up once, you get there in one load. If you load it up twice, you can get there with half a load and give the mule a little bit less to carry. How much more time does it take? How much more work is it for the human? So we just simply double down, and the mule carries more. And it doesn't necessarily mean the mule can't carry more. It just means the mule is carrying more. And we take the responsibility off our shoulders and put it on the shoulders of the animals. That's where this all comes from. This all comes from a space where we have to start recognizing our responsibility to all of this. So I'll give you another space for it that I actually said I was going to come back to. There's a prayer that I'm sure all of you have heard or even said multiple times when you're teaching little kids, and that's the Moshe, right? The prayer that we say before we eat a piece of bread. And the words are at the end, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. You're praising God and thanking God for bringing bread out of the ground. I have traveled far and I've traveled wide, and I've never seen bread growing out of the ground. It just doesn't. There's no seed you can plant. It just doesn't happen. There's wheat that comes out of the ground, but wheat isn't bread. There's eggs that come out of chickens, but it doesn't necessarily make bread. There's water that comes out of springs out of the skies. You might mix with all that stuff, but it doesn't come out of the ground that way. It's not bread. So why do we have a prayer that we've all said 1,000 times or more that says, who brings bread out of the ground? The answer for it is because remember what I said before about the different ways from the biblical times until now, how God is taking less role in our lives? We're thanking God for giving the opportunity for that thing which is known as, by the way, there's bread without eggs, so I'll just say, sick of my sanity. For the fact that wheat can grow and water is there, and by the way, think of the process of making that wheat into bread. First of all, it's got to be planted. Then it's got to grow. You got to nourish it. And it finally comes out. And what you have to do with it then? You have to thatch it. You have to make it right. You have to separate the wheat from the chaff. You take the wheat and you still have to. I mean, it's a process. And once it's finally ground, and once it finally becomes flour, once you finally add water, so once you finally bake it and let it rise and everything else, otherwise you get matzah, all you're left with at the end is finally you got bread. All that was our doing. That's the relationship we want to have with all of this nature around us. It's something that's just simply our way of saying, what role do I have in this? There's a wonderful story about Honey the Circle Maker. I'm sure many of you know the story. Anybody know the story? Honey the Circle Maker is known for making circles. That's why it's called Honey the Circle Maker. And he's found one day planting a tree. And this young punk kid, it's the way I should interpret the story, so it's not told this way, it's my interpretation. He comes up to him and says, hey, Honey, what are you doing? That is the most ridiculous tree you're planting there. You're an old man. By the time that tree bears fruits, you'll have none of it. You'll be long gone before that. And Honey says, I'm not planting it for my sake, I'm planting it for the generations to come after me. By the way, I think Honey's name should be changed from Circle Maker to the Tree Planter, because he's much more well known for the tree story than he is for any circle he ever made. So that story, I think, is a better one that gives us, again, the opportunity to understand, I can't be responsible for only what's working for me now, but what's going to happen into the future. If we don't start taking care of our animals today, there's George. I should have brought a picture of George. Big mistake on my part. George was the last of a particular type of turtle that lived in the Galapagos Islands. And for years, they kept trying to find another turtle like George, his species, and there were none. They killed them all off. And they tried mating George with other species, and George simply was not interested. So George eventually died. And George is now stuffed, and he's in a museum you can go to in Galapagos Islands and visit George. I had actually the pleasure of seeing George when George was alive. And I'm hearing these stories about George, and then George is gonna sit there thinking, how is it possible that I'm the witness to the end of a species? We all are now witnesses to the end of species. Our systems are dying left and right. Our oceans are not the same oceans they used to be. Dive sites used to go to 10 years ago, are not the same dive sites as they are today. If this doesn't become our responsibility, what was the first line? For there will be no one to repair it after you. Let's do one more and then we'll have a discussion. Skip to page 448. No, that's not good. 449. So there's a long story, I'm not gonna tell all of it, that there are two stories of creation. There's Adam 1 and Adam 2. Hopefully you'll learn about that, it's kind of complicated, I'm gonna do that. But there are questions about what we were in the story of creation, which is what we are after the story of Noah, after the story of the flood. And in the story of creation, we are all supposed to be vegetarians. Because it basically says, God said to Adam and Eve, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is on the earth, and upon every tree that is seed-bearing fruit, that should be yours for food. Doesn't say anything about pigs, doesn't say anything about cows, doesn't say anything about lamb, doesn't say anything about, what else is out there? Chickens, thank you, fish, none of that is in there. It only says specifically, fruits on the trees and on the ground, seed-bearing fruits. That's what you got to do. After the flood, we hear a different story. I don't know if it's in this text. It's not. After the text, after the flood, we actually have a whole different relationship. We hear stories of that. We're supposed to be responsible for all living things on the earth, and it suggests that it's not just yours to watch over, it's yours to secure, it's yours to care for, it's yours for arguably to consume. What do you think happened between the first story of creation and the second story of creation, where all of a sudden now we have responsibility, we can go ahead and eat it all?
God sent us from Eden and said, now it's your responsibility. I'm not taking charge anymore.
Excellent.
You gotta do it yourself.
Excellent, 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 excellent. If God's really gonna be involved in our lives and slap our hands every time we do something wrong, that's one thing. But if we're outside the Garden of Eden now, it's all ours to figure out what we're gonna do with, then go ahead and do it. How you interpret it is up to you. What you do with it is up to you. But you better recognize there's a responsibility for you to do something with it. I get a kick out of I watch a weekly Meet the Press every Sunday. And Eddie Martini is a advertiser on Meet the Press. Does anybody know what Eddie Martini's is? It's a very high-end restaurant, I believe, in Brooklyn. It is. It's a steakhouse.
Yeah, it's food look amazing.
They do. The images are always amazing. And even as a vegan, I say it. However, this last week's, I think it's now 2 weeks, right? It's up there, it's got 3 different steaks on a platter. And it says it's all about the meats. And it's like Eddie Martinez is advertising for me not to eat them. Right? It's almost saying to me, again, like I said, as a vegan, I'm looking at saying, okay, so you don't want me to become that, right? And I'm wondering how much of what we've covered today is telling us how to behave or how not to behave. So I'll give you a fun one. If you think about the 10 Commandments, how many of them are nots?
How many of them are what?
Not.
Oh,
And we're all going there.
Yeah, we're all
Half. Half are do not. And what are the other half? Dues, right? Give me some of the, give me one of the ones that's the do. Give me a good one. Out of the set, it's a good one.
On your father and mother.
Out of your father and mother. That's good enough. What are some of the don'ts?
Yeah.
What's that?
Thou shalt not kill.
I shall not kill. The other one.
Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor.
Excellent. Two perfect ones again. Which one would you rather listen to all day long?
You got a lot of preschool teachers in the room, which do you say more to the students, do or don't?
do.
I've been in your classrooms. I hear you find ways to redirect children without saying no. I've seen it over and over again in the school. Why?
Because if you keep saying don't, they'll just think everything is, I can't do it. But I give them a suggestion that you can do it this way, or, you know, whatever. It says, or a pillow says, I would like to take all your tears instead of don't cry anymore. Just have a light pillow.
I've never heard that line before.
I love it.
Well, because we have one who's this year.
Yeah, that is. This is our.
This year that's coming all the time. So, and he gets unhappy very easily, and I said, you know, that green pillow might want all your tears. So, you know, and he just responds, he said, I think I'll do the yellow. You know, so I just want him to think of something for self-soothing.
I would argue that, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking of a child I had who was 3 years old, and he'd come for breakfast every morning and we'd sit at the table. And he was throwing food on the floor. And I did say, no, I don't want you doing that. And he said to me, Mary, no one says no to me ever. And I.
3-year-old?
Huh?
Wow.
3-year-old, yes. His
I
name-
had one this year too. So
His name was Xander. And I said to him, I said, I will say no to you, Xander. I said, I will say no to you if you run by the street and a car is coming. I will say, no, no, Xander. I want you to be safe. So I did context of the word no that would be positive, I guess. But it's.
I teach kids who are just 3, and one of the most like spoken lines in the room is, he said no to me, or like referring to another child is, kids, they have a big problem with other kids telling them no. And so like we have to have like conversations. It's like, if your friend is like saying no to you, that is not a punish, you are not being punished, you are being told like, don't touch me, basically. But it's like, yeah, every like other day, I still get like, Miss Haley, he told me no. And I'm like, that's what life is, kind of, you know, you gotta listen to no
Right.
sometimes.
it has to be nice.
I don't know, I think it's a parenting thing these days. I have a problem, and that's why I told the story of Xander. Because I think there are times, I think it's also developmental skills where they say no.
Yeah.
Kids say no.
I will
That's
go
what
back
I
and
mean.
forth with
Yeah.
you.
Don't
I know more
say
than
no.
they do. They're one.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say that research shows that children hear no more times in their life than they, or don't more times in their life than the positive, so it's like, try to give them options instead of don't run in the hallway, I just say, where can you run? You can run to the gym, you can run outside, so that's why I try to rephrase the no.
How do we apply that to this topic? How do we apply it to the way we treat nature, or the way we treat our animals, or we treat the environment we live in?
Well, I have, you know, kids, especially when someone likes to step on all the ants and the spiders and everything. And I said, hey, did you know that spider could be food for that bird that's just flying overhead. Or every little thing has to have something to eat. So they have, sometimes when you see them carrying plum, but we're trying to get our leftovers, but we're trying to get them to, you don't have to kill everything. It's like, just think of everything else in the world, like the ant, bats need mosquitoes to exist. Stuff like that. Mosquitoes are nasty to us, but it is a good thing for bats.
What's that?
I said, if you come in my house, it dies.
What do you?
We teach children to, respect the trees. Some of the children like to break the branches off the tree, so we tell them why the tree gives us shade, food for the animals. So we should respect the trees.
I kind of try to put the kids in like the animals' shoes, like we have a lot of rabbits like around the playground, and we will catch kids chasing, baby rabbits. And I'll kind of say to them like, for you, like you're a big scary monster, that rabbit. How would you feel if you were walking around and a huge monster came and started to chase you?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I wouldn't like that.
Is the rabbit allowed in the house?
Rabbit coming out.
I think back to your tomato plant.
Yeah.
If we turn it on its head and say, not we have to recycle and we aren't allowed to touch the branch on the tree, but we get to. We get to take care of the tree or the plant. We get to, take pictures of the rabbit so we can look at it. We get to, as we see it as a privilege instead of a burden.
One of the opportunities, I'll use an ant as an example, and I think it's actually that same space as that massive mountain. Has anybody ever seen a blown up image of an ant? They're incredible. I have a hard time saying that I think any of these animals, any of these species, are really incredible. And I think that may be another way of having a child comprehend more what these really tiny little things are that are out there. And a responsibility to it. I think growing up, there was a Twilight Zone. There was an image in the Twilight Zone, was a series, one of the series was a story of a man who became the god of a nation. There were these tiny little people. And at the end of the last scene in that particular episode is this massive foot coming towards him. Right, because he would stomp all over these people in order for them to love him, to obey him, and then the last thing you see is, he's so proud of himself, he looks up and there's a foot about to come down and step on him. I think that's kind of the perspective. I think that's what you did, right? By saying, well, would you like it if? I think that those are the kind of things that if we can put things in perspective for children, I think it helps. I think that's what a lot of us telling us. I think a lot of these teachings, like I said, the story of the big toe, this guy of a big toe, I think is less stories for children as much as it is stories for adults. One of the pleasures of reading this book of Genesis as an adult, as opposed to hearing it as a child, is how much different perspective I have today. Like, I have friends who want me to go fishing with them. I love the idea of going fishing with them. Just please don't ask me to put any bait on the hook. Right? I'll go hang out with you for as much as you want me to. If you end the day, to me, I'm sorry, that's like cruelty, especially since I don't eat it. If you're gonna do that and at least eat the fish, great, I'm fine with that. But just for sport, I have a hard time with that. Those are the kind of things that I don't quite understand how we're doing this. Having said that, the good news is a lot of people who are doing the fishing ended up having a better relationship with the ocean and want to take care of it more, so you can fish more. So good, I'm good with that. I love, I'll use her as an example now because we can actually call her state senator Jody Haber-Sinnigan. Jody Haber-Sinnigan is one of those environmentally active people who made sure that if people are gonna go and hunt wolves, don't do it with your dogs. There's legislation in the state of Wisconsin that did this. It's like, we did what? We trained dogs to hunt wolves. And the wolves, protecting themselves, go after these dogs. I mean, what if we got, what's happened to us? So she had to literally pass legislation in the state of Wisconsin to ban that from happening. And in fact, by the way, has anybody ever been in the presence of a wolf? wow, are they cool? Scare the heck out of me, but wow, are they beautiful? Especially the big silver ones we have in northern Wisconsin, the really big guys, they're magnificent. And I do want to stand in awe of them, and I think that's what really, at the end of the day, what I hoped I did today was actually just bring out the awe in all of this. Can you bring up that last image?
Go back to the Google Doc. And go down.
There we go.
Check that out.
How do you not want to just simply go, wow?
Yeah.
And by the way,
Where was it taken?
this was taken actually in Israel. This was taken 3 weeks ago in Israel.
Pretty cool.
Can anybody tell if it's sunrise or sunset? Set. This is set. You stand in awe of everything around us, and I think we'll treat the world with.
I love watching the sun come up, all the different colors as it's going down. It's just unreal how it makes you feel.
Whenever I can, I like to pray outside instead of in a synagogue, because I feel like it's much
holier is this. Thank you all, this is great. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you everyone for being here. Next Lunch and Learn is January 22nd. We were asked to take off December because the staffing was difficult and, but we do have a night class all about doing text study with your students and even your itty bitty ones. So, that is December 4th at 6 p.m. here. Let's see. December 4th. Yes, and Moshe will join us again in April. If you enjoyed, I'm sure you did, we'll be back in April. So, thank you so much. Thank you. So I have a different question.